The morning wind carried salt from ancient seas across the mesa, while iron shoes rang against stone in the canyon below. Arizona territory stretched endless and unforgiving beneath a pewter sky. The year 1879 marking another season of change in lands that had witnessed centuries pass like dust devils. Eliza Quinn adjusted her worn bonnet against the rising wind, counting heads among the children trudging behind her makeshift wagon. 14 souls, Navajo youngsters mixed with a handful of settler children whose parents worked the mines or scraped living from stubborn soil. The temporary schoolhouse waited 3 miles ahead, nothing more than planks and hope balanced against the desert's indifference.
"Miss Quinn,"
young Thomas Begay called out, clutching something small in his fist.
"Storm coming."
She'd learned to trust the boy's instincts, inherited from generations who read weather in cloud shadows and bird flight. The northwestern horizon indeed darkened with an ominous wall of dust, moving faster than any wagon could outrun. "Everyone in close," Eliza commanded, her Irish lilt still coloring words after 15 years in America. The children huddled near the wagon as the first gusts struck, sending her lesson papers whirling like confused birds. The horses screamed. Not whinnied screamed, as only horses sensing mortal danger could. The lead mare reared, eyes rolling white, as the sandstorm engulfed them in a brown shroud. Eliza grabbed for the reins, but they whipped away from her hands. Through the chaos of dust and terror, she glimpsed a figure emerging from the canyon rocks, a man moving with liquid purpose through the storm. He wore no hat, long black hair bound with red cloth, traditional silver glinting at his wrists. In 3 swift movements, he'd caught the lead mare's bridle, spoken words Eliza couldn't hear above the wind, and brought the panicked animal to stillness. The other horses followed their leader's calm, and suddenly the impossible was managed. They stood quiet in the storm's heart, while sand scoured the world beyond.
"This way,"
the man said once the worst had passed, his English careful but clear. "Shelter in the rocks." Eliza didn't hesitate. "When someone appeared from nowhere to save your life in the desert, you followed?" He led them to a natural overhang where ancient peoples had once waited out similar storms, visible by the smoke-blackened ceiling and worn grooves where countless hands had steadied themselves. "I'm obliged to you, Mr. Yazzie." He checked each child with quick efficiency, producing a water gourd from somewhere and ensuring everyone drank. Hastian Yazzie. She knew the title meant Mr. in Navajo, a sign of respect. He was perhaps 35, face weathered by sun and wind into something between leather and stone, but his hands were gentle, checking a scrape on little Mary Morrison's knee. "Eliza Quinn. I run the school in San Miguel." His dark eyes flicked to her, taking in the modest dress, the teaching materials scattered by wind, the careful way she positioned herself between him and the children despite his help. "The new one. Heard about it." What he'd heard, she couldn't guess. The town talked plenty about the widow woman teaching Indian children alongside proper Christians, as the minister's wife put it. But Yazzie simply nodded and turned to study the sky. "Storm's breaking. I'll see you to town." It wasn't a question. Eliza found herself oddly grateful for his presumption. The children trusted him already, even the Morrison girl, whose father spoke venom about savages at every opportunity, sat calm under his attention. They reached San Miguel as afternoon bled toward evening. The town squatted like a toad beside the dry riverbed, all adobe and ambition. Yazzie helped her unload at the schoolhouse, one room with a packed dirt floor and windows that were more suggestion than fact. "You'll need proper shutters before monsoon season," he observed. "I'll need proper everything before then." She tried for lightness, but exhaustion weighted her words. "Thank you, Mr. Yazzie. I don't know what would have happened." "You'd have managed." He studied her with those unreadable eyes. "Desert teachers learn or leave. You're still here." He departed before she could respond, moving toward the Mexican quarter where he apparently stabled horses and worked silver when not appearing from nowhere to rescue foolish schoolteachers. Eliza set about settling the children, checking their belongings, making mental notes about who needed what. Young Thomas still clutched his small bundle, a piece of woven wool his grandmother had made, what some called a protection blessing. Night fell like a dropped curtain. She lit the oil lamps and began preparing simple lessons for tomorrow, trying to ignore how her hands still shook from the day's terror. Through the warped window, she glimpsed riders at the town's edge. Their leader, a bull of a man with scarred hands, gestured toward the water rights office. She recognized him from town meetings, Silas Pike, who hired his guns to whoever paid best. Currently, that was the railroad company pushing through the territory like a metal snake, consuming everything in its path. "Ain't right," she heard him growl to his companions. "Old McKendry's sitting on the best water for 50 miles. Railroad needs it. We need it. Something's gotta give." His men laughed an ugly sound that made her step back from the window. She'd heard such laughter before, in Missouri, usually before someone got hurt. Pike's gaze swept the street and landed on the schoolhouse. His smile reminded her of wolves. Well, the teacher's burning midnight oil, dedicated woman, they say, teaching all sorts. The emphasis on sorts carried poison. Wonder what else she's teaching them savage children. Eliza pulled the shutters closed, what shutters there were, and tried to focus on her work. But sleep, when it finally came on her narrow cot, brought dreams of sand and screaming horses and dark eyes that saw too much. She woke to smoke. Not the gentle smoke of morning fires, but the acrid bite of burning paper. Her student roster, the careful record of each child's progress, blazed in the center of the floor. She grabbed the wash basin, dousing flames before they could spread to the wooden walls. But the damage was done. Weeks of documentation destroyed. "Miss Quinn." She spun to find Yazzie in the doorway, drawn by smoke or providence. Without speaking, he helped her carry the smoldering remains outside. In the ashes, she found something that made her blood chill, a railroad company seal, probably fallen from whoever set the fire. "They want no records," Yazzie said quietly. "No proof these children exist as students. Makes it easier to—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. If children weren't documented as attending school, they could be called truants. Their parents could be fined or jailed. Their land could be seized for abandonment. "Over my dead body," Eliza muttered, then flushed at the impropriety. Yazzie almost smiled. "Brave words. But Pike doesn't bluff." "Neither do I." She met his gaze steadily. "These children deserve education, all of them." This time he did smile, just slightly. "Desert teachers," he repeated. "Learn or leave." As dawn broke fully, he helped her salvage what they could. Thomas Big A's protection bundle had somehow survived, tucked beneath medical supplies that were only singed. The boy would see it as a sign. Perhaps it was. "I'll make shutters," Yazzie said as he prepared to leave. "And a better door. I can't pay much." "Didn't ask for pay." He paused at the threshold. "My sister's children come here. My clan's children. Payment enough." She watched him walk away, leading his horse rather than riding, stopping to speak with early-rising townspeople. Each conversation seemed to end with glances toward the schoolhouse. By noon, she had visitors, women bringing food, men offering lumber scraps, children shyly presenting hand-copied pages to replace the burned roster. The war for San Miguel's soul had begun, whether she'd meant to start it or not. That night, writing by lamplight again, she began keeping duplicate records in a hidden place. Outside, the desert wind sang through the canyon, carrying whispers of change. In the Mexican quarter, Hasty and Yazzie worked silver by firelight, shaping metal with patient hands. Each piece told a story, water serpents and cloud beings, and the endless cycle of seasons. His thoughts drifted to the Irish woman with steel in her spine and sadness in her eyes. She'd last longer than most, he decided, perhaps long enough to matter. The desert had its own justice, slow but certain as erosion, and sometimes It sent unexpected allies in the storm. The notice appeared overnight, nailed to every public board in San Miguel like a declaration of war. Eliza read it 3 times before the full meaning sank in, her morning coffee growing cold in her hands. By order of the Territorial Water Commission and the Arizona Northern Railroad Company, all water usage from Bitterwash Creek must be registered and approved. Unauthorized drawing will result in confiscation of livestock and property, effective immediately. Sheriff Doolin stood beside the largest posting, thumbs hooked in his vest, badge catching the morning sun. Law's the law, folks. Railroad needs guarantees for their investment. Can't have people stealing water meant for progress. Stealing, old McKendry spat tobacco juice dangerously close to Doolin's boots. My family's been watering stock at Bitterwash since before you were born. Sheriff. Times change. Doolin's smile reminded Eliza of spoiled meat. Speaking of which, someone's been stealing railroad ties. Wouldn't know anything about that, would you? The accusation hung like smoke. Everyone knew the railroad left surplus ties scattered across the desert, but calling their collection theft was new. Eliza watched the sheriff's game unfold create enough violations, and anyone could be arrested. Miss Quinn. Doolin's attention swung to her like a rusty gate. Need a word about your educational activities. She followed him to his office, noting how Pike's men lounged outside like patient vultures. The sheriff's desk held stacks of papers she recognized copies of her teaching materials. Concerning reports, Miss Quinn, you're teaching these Indian children to read and write English alongside white children. Some folks call that stirring up trouble. I call it education. Sheriff. Do you? He leaned back, chair groaning. See, educated Indians get ideas, start thinking they deserve the same treatment as white folks. That's not natural order. The natural order of ignorance. His face darkened. Careful, woman. You're already on thin ice. Widow, no male protection, teaching mixed classes. Wouldn't take much to have you declared unfit. The threat chilled her more than she'd show. Without her teaching position, she had nothing. But backing down meant betraying every child who trusted her. Is that all, Sheriff? For now, he smiled again. But I'll be watching. One step wrong, and you'll find yourself on the next stage east. Eliza left with her spine straight and stomach churning. Outside, she nearly collided with Yazzie leading a string of horses toward the livery. He steadied her with one hand, reading her face in a glance. Doolin. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Come. He led her away from the sheriff's office, toward the shade of Garcia's mercantile. What did he threaten? The kindness in his voice nearly undid her composure. The usual, unfit woman, corrupting influences. Nothing I haven't heard before. But different here. Yazzie studied the street, noting positions of Pike's men. In Missouri, you could disappear. Here, everyone watches. She started at the mention of Missouri. How did you? The way you stand when men yell, the scars on your hands from defending yourself, the wedding ring worn backward to hide the scratch marks inside. His voice held no judgment, only observation. My sister survived such a marriage. I know the signs. Eliza's hand moved unconsciously to the ring she still wore, turned inward so the damaged band didn't show where her late husband had grabbed it, twisting during one of his rages. He's dead, she said quietly. 2 years now. But not gone. The understanding in those simple words nearly broke her. She'd fled Missouri after Thomas's death, a death the authorities called unfortunate accident, though everyone knew he'd been drinking when he fell down those stairs. She'd pushed him. Yes, but only after he'd cornered her with a fireplace poker, promising to teach her proper respect. No, she agreed. Not gone. They stood in comfortable silence until a commotion drew their attention. Near the water office, Pike's men had surrounded a Navajo family trying to water their sheep. The elder man held papers old Spanish land grants, but Pike tore them up with theatrical disgust. The Mexican papers don't mean nothing in American territory. He declared, "You want water, you register proper, pay the fees." "What fees?" the elder asked in accented English. "Processing, security, protection." Pike's grin widened. $50. Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd. $50 was more than most families saw in 6 months. "We have watered here since before memory," the elder said with dignity. "The water belongs to the land, not to papers." "Wrong answer." Pike nodded to his men, who began driving the sheep away from the creek. One lamb, separated from its mother, bleated pitifully. Yazzie moved before Eliza could stop him, not aggressively, but simply placing himself between Pike's men and the animals. "The Morrison family waters here too. They paying $50. Pike's face darkened. "Morrison's got proper documentation." "Show me." The challenge hung between them. Pike's hand drifted toward his gun, but Yazzie remained still, hands visible and empty. The moment stretched like heated metal. "You calling me a liar, boy?" "I'm asking to see papers, same as you asked them." Sheriff Doolin appeared as if summoned. "Problem here?" "Your Indian friend seems confused about the law." Pike growled. "No confusion." Yazzie's voice stayed level. "Just questions." Doolin's piggy eyes narrowed. "Questions can be dangerous. Breed, how about you move along before someone gets hurt?" Eliza stepped forward. "I'd like to see the documentation too. Sheriff, for my records, I keep track of all my students' families. Make sure they're following proper procedures." The lie came smooth as honey, but it forced Doolin's hand. He couldn't refuse a white woman's reasonable request without raising suspicions. "Come by the office tomorrow," he muttered. "Papers are being processed." "Processed where?" Eliza pressed. "The territorial capital, I could write to confirm." "Tomorrow," Doolin snapped, then turned on Pike. "Let them water the damn sheep. Once, after that, they pay or stay away." It was a small victory, but Eliza saw the calculation in Pike's eyes. She'd made herself a target now, aligned with the wrong side. As the crowd dispersed, Yazzie walked her back toward the schoolhouse. "That was dangerous," he said quietly. "So was what you did." "I'm used to it. You're not." They'd reached the school where children were gathering for afternoon lessons. Several Navajo students hung back, unsure if they were still welcome after the morning's confrontation. "Come in, all of you," Eliza called. "We have work to do." As the children filed past, Yazzie caught her arm gently. "They'll come for you now. Not openly, but sideways, like snakes." "Then I'll be ready." He studied her face, then reached into his saddlebag. "My grandmother's remedy, for when the shaking comes at night." He pressed a small cloth bundle into her hands, herbs that smelled of sage and something sweeter. "The shaking." "After violence, the body remembers even when the mind tries to forget. Make tea, it helps." Before she could respond, he was gone, leading his horses toward the canyon. Eliza tucked the bundle into her pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. That night, grading papers by lamplight, she heard them coming, boots trying for stealth but failing on gravel. She'd prepared, moving her most valuable items to a hidden cache beneath loose floorboards. When the door burst open, she sat calmly at her desk. "Evening, gentlemen." Rather late for a social call. Pike entered first, followed by 2 men who smelled of whiskey and violence. "Just checking on our school, marm. Heard you might have some irregular documentation here." "All my papers are in order." "We'll see." They tore through the schoolhouse with practiced efficiency, finding nothing but standard teaching materials. Pike's frustration grew visible. "Where is it?" he finally demanded. "Where's what?" His backhand would have caught her if she hadn't learned to read such movements in Missouri. She swayed aside, letting him hit air, then stood with quiet dignity. "That's assault. Mr. Pike. Sheriff Doolin will hear about this." Pike laughed. "Doolin, woman. Who do you think sent us? The confirmation of what she'd suspected still stung. But before Pike could try again, hoofbeats sounded outside. Yazzie appeared in the doorway. Not alone, several Mexican and Navajo men flanked him, all armed for night hunting but clearly ready for other purposes. Evening ride. Yazzie said mildly. Heard commotion. Everything well. Miss Quinn. Pike measured the odds and didn't like them. Just leaving. But this ain't over. School teacher? Not by half. After they'd gone, Yazzie examined the ransacked room. You expected this? Missouri taught me to hide what matters. She retrieved her true records from beneath the floor, along with something else, a daguerreotype of her late husband, face scratched out with deliberate strokes. Yazzie studied the defaced image. He hurt you. Every day for 7 years. The words came easier in darkness, until I ended it. Good. The simple acceptance in that single word meant more than any sympathy could have. They worked together to restore order, and she made tea from his grandmother's herbs. It did help the shaking, as promised. They'll try again, Yazzie warned as dawn approached. I know, but I'll be here. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. Desert teachers, stubborn as century plants. As he left, Eliza noticed he'd fixed the broken door latch and reinforced the window shutters, small protections that spoke louder than words. She prepared for the morning's classes, knowing the real education had only just begun. The battle lines were drawn now, clear as the territorial maps being rewritten in distant offices. But here in San Miguel, justice might still flow like water if enough people stood together to defend it. The railroad survey team arrived with the morning sun, their instruments glinting like weapons against the desert light. Eliza watched from the schoolhouse as they set up transit levels and measuring chains, mapping the future across ancient lands. Their leader, a thin man with spectacles and Eastern manners, directed operations with bloodless efficiency. But it was the man who stepped from the second coach that made her blood chill. He wore a black suit despite the heat, carried a leather portfolio like a shield, and his eyes missed nothing. A Pinkerton detective she'd seen their kind in Missouri, hunting fugitives and breaking strikes with equal dedication. Miss Quinn, he approached with practiced courtesy. Josiah Reeves, Pinkerton Agency. I understand you're doing admirable work here with the local children. She kept her hands steady on the primer she'd been preparing. Education is always admirable, Mr. Reeves. Indeed, though some forms of education can be misguided. He produced a file from his portfolio. Eliza Mary Quinn, née O'Sullivan, born County Cork. Immigrated 1864, married Thomas Quinn of Independence. Missouri, 1872. Widowed rather suddenly in 1877. Each fact fell like a stone into still water. Eliza forced herself to breathe normally. Your research is thorough, she managed. It needs to be. You see, there are questions about your husband's death. A fall downstairs. Wasn't it after neighbors reported sounds of domestic disturbance? The inquest ruled it accidental. Inquests can be revisited, especially when new evidence emerges. He smiled thinly. But I'm not here about the past. The railroad values progress, not history. We simply want to ensure that progress isn't impeded by misunderstandings. What sort of misunderstandings? The kind where Eastern sympathizers stir up local populations against legitimate development, where children are taught that they have rights beyond their station, where traditional hierarchies are questioned. Eliza met his gaze steadily. I teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, Mr. Reeves. Nothing more revolutionary than that. We shall see. He tipped his hat. I'll be staying in town for the survey. Perhaps we'll have occasion to speak again. Oh, and Miss Quinn, the statute of limitations on murder is quite lengthy. Food for thought. He departed, leaving Eliza gripping the desk edge to hide her trembling hands. Through the window, She saw Yazzie approaching with his nephew, a bright boy named Samuel who excelled at mathematics. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and she saw he'd witnessed the Pinkertons' visit. Inside, settling the children for lessons, she tried to push down the familiar fear, but young Maria Gonzalez raised her hand timidly. "Miss Quinn, why do those men measure everything? They're planning where to put railroad tracks." "Maria, but what about the old paths where my grandfather drives his sheep?" "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll have to wait and see." Samuel Yazzie spoke up, his English precise despite being his second language. "My uncle says they measure so they can take. First they measure, then they fence, then they own." Before Eliza could respond, Sheriff Doolin appeared in the doorway. "Miss Quinn, need these children for questioning. There's been vandalism at the survey camp." "What vandalism?" "Stakes pulled up. Equipment disturbed. These Indian kids were seen in the area." "When?" "Last night. These children were at home with their families last night, Sheriff, as I'm sure their parents will confirm." Doolin's face reddened. "You vouching for them?" "I'm stating facts." "Would you like me to write to the territorial governor about harassment of school children? I'm sure he'd be interested in how education is being handled in San Miguel." The threat was empty. She had no connections to the governor, but Doolin didn't know that. He retreated with muttered warnings about knowing where loyalties lie. That afternoon, Yazzie met her at the well behind Garcia's store. He'd arranged it to look accidental, but she recognized the deliberateness in his timing. "The detective troubles you," he observed, helping her with the heavy bucket. "He knows about Missouri, about my husband." Yazzie absorbed this without surprise. "Will he act on it?" "Only if I interfere with the railroad's plans." She laughed bitterly. "Which I'm already doing by teaching these children that they're human beings worthy of respect." "Leave then. Run!" She looked at him sharply. "Is that what you do?" "No, but I'm not carrying your weight." He studied her face. "Though you carry it well, like a woman whose decided fear is just another burden to bear." They walked slowly back toward the school, taking the long route through cottonwoods that offered blessed shade. Yazzie pointed to marks on the trees' old blazes indicating water rights from Spanish times. "My grandmother's mother saw these carved," he said. "Each family knew their portion, their time to draw water. No papers needed, just honor. The railroad men don't recognize honor as legal tender." "No, they recognize force, and we're outnumbered." He paused beside a massive cottonwood. "But water has its own force, patient, persistent, finding ways around obstacles." That evening, Eliza attended something she'd only heard whispered about, a gathering of the local tribes for a ceremony she couldn't fully understand, but was honored to witness from a respectful distance. Yazzie had arranged it, explaining she needed to see what the railroad threatened to destroy. She sat with the Mexican women at the edge of firelight, watching dancers move in patterns old as the stones. The ceremony spoke of rain and corn, hunting and harmony, the delicate web connecting all living things. Children she taught during the day transformed into links in an ancient chain, their faces painted with symbols that meant more than any alphabet she could offer. "They pray for balance," Senora Garcia whispered beside her, "for the world to remember its proper shape." Later, walking her back to town under a canopy of stars, Yazzie was unusually talkative. "My nephew Samuel asks many questions. Why do we live as we do? Why don't we fight the white man's ways more directly?" "What do you tell him?" "That fighting isn't always with fists or guns. Sometimes it's with patience. Sometimes with knowledge." He glanced at her. "Sometimes with unexpected allies." They'd reached the schoolhouse. Someone had left a bundle on the step, fresh herbs and a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. The gifts had been appearing regularly since her confrontation with Pike. Small tokens of support from the community. "I need to show you something," Eliza said impulsively. She led him inside and revealed her hidden cache, not just the saved records, but maps she'd been drawing. I've been documenting the traditional water sources, the old Spanish grants, the tribal territories as the elders describe them. If there's ever a legal challenge. Yazzie studied the maps with growing amazement.
This is dangerous knowledge.
All real knowledge is dangerous to someone. She carefully returned the documents to their hiding place. Your grandmother's tea helps with more than shaking. It clarifies thought. He smiled at that.
She'd like you. Stubborn women appreciate each other.
The moment stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with possibility. Then hoofbeats shattered the peace. Pike and his men thundered past, heading toward the Mexican quarter. Screams followed. They ran toward the commotion, finding chaos at the Garcia home. Pike's men were dumping sacks of cornmeal into the street while Pike himself waved a paper. "Contraband," he shouted. "Hidden railroad property. This meal was made from corn grown on railroad land."
"That's our winter stores,"
Senor Garcia protested.
"Grown on our own plot."
"Prove it." Pike's smile was savage. "Show me receipts for seed. Show me papers for the land." "No, then it's theft." Eliza pushed forward.
"This is a legal seizure. Pike, you have no authority."
"Don't I?" Reeves emerged from shadow. Another paper in hand. "Federal warrant to investigate interstate commerce violations. Amazing what a helpful judge in Prescott will sign." The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Without documents, few could read or afford. Any property could be declared stolen. Any family could be ruined.
"I'll witness this,"
Eliza declared loudly.
"Every bit of it.
And I'll write to every newspaper from here to San Francisco about railroad men stealing food from children's mouths." Pike stepped close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "You do that, schoolmarm. Write all you want. Won't matter when you're in a Missouri jail for murder." Yazzie moved silently beside her, his presence changing Pike's calculation. The big man stepped back, but his point was made. They had weapons beyond fists. That night, cleaning up the scattered cornmeal with the Garcia family, Eliza felt the weight of the web closing around them all, but she also felt something else, the strength that came from not standing alone. "We'll share our stores," she told Senora Garcia.
"What I have is yours, and ours yours,"
the older woman replied, gripping Eliza's hands.
"This is how we survive. Together."
Walking home, Yazzie beside her, Eliza made a decision. "Teach me," she said suddenly, "about the water rights, the old ways of managing resources, everything the elders know that isn't written down. That's not knowledge given lightly."
"I'm not asking lightly."
She stopped, facing him in the moonlight.
"They want to erase it, all the customs, the claims, the very memory of how things were.
But they can't erase what's in our minds. And they can't prosecute me for teaching what I've learned." Yazzie considered her for a long moment. "It would take time. Trust. You'd have to understand not just facts but meanings. Not just water, but why water is sacred." "I'm a good student?" "We'll see." But his slight smile suggested he already knew. "Tomorrow, after your classes, we'll start with why the desert blooms after rain." As she prepared for bed, Eliza touched the hidden maps, the growing repository of dangerous knowledge. The railroad might have money and guns, legal tricks and federal backing, but knowledge, like water, had a way of finding its own level. And sometimes the pen truly was mightier than the sword if you knew where to aim it. Outside, coyotes called across the mesas, their songs older than any surveyor's measurements. The desert remembered everything, patient as stone. Perhaps it would remember this too the year a widow and a warrior began mapping resistance one careful lesson at a time. The rain came suddenly to Cottonwood Wash, transforming the dry gulch into a rushing torrent within minutes. Eliza had moved her afternoon classes there, under the shade of ancient trees, teaching geometry by measuring shadows when the sky opened without warning. "To the rocks!" she shouted over the roar, herding children toward the higher ground. But chaos erupted as Pike's men appeared from nowhere. torches blazing despite the downpour. "Illegal assembly," Pike bellowed. "Inciting unrest on railroad property."
"This is public land,"
Eliza protested, shielding the younger children with her body. "Not anymore." He waved another of his endless papers, ink already running in the rain. "Purchased this morning. You're trespassing." The men advanced, torches somehow still burning, reaching for the teaching materials, the precious books wrapped in oilcloth. Young Samuel Yazzie tried to protect their arithmetic slates and received a shove that sent him sprawling in the mud. Maria Gonzalez screamed as a man grabbed the medicine box Eliza always carried. Through sheets of rain, Yazzie appeared like a spirit of the storm itself. He moved between the children and Pike's men, not threatening but immovable as the canyon walls. "Get them to the arroyo," he told Eliza quietly. "The old path." She understood immediately. Guiding the terrified children along a hidden trail the Navajo had used for generations. Behind them. She heard Pike's cursing and Yazzie's calm responses, buying them time with words instead of violence. They huddled in a natural shelter carved by centuries of floods. Children pressed close, rain drumming on stone. Little Rebecca Morrison was missing the daughter of the very man who spoke against Indian education at every town meeting.
"I have to go back,"
Eliza said. "No." Thomas Bigay, old beyond his 12 years, pointed through the rain. She went that way, toward the deep wash. The deep wash that would now be a death trap of rushing water. Eliza didn't hesitate. She plunged back into the storm, fighting wind and rain, calling Rebecca's name. The girl's pale dress stood out against dark rocks where she clung to a juniper, water rising around her feet. "Hold on!" Eliza waded in, current tugging at her skirts. The water was cold, stronger than expected, carrying debris from miles upstream. She reached Rebecca just as the girl's grip failed, catching her around the waist. But now they were both trapped, water rising. No clear path back. Eliza held Rebecca high, feeling her own feet losing purchase on the slick stones. Then a rope splashed beside them. Yazzie stood on the bank, having anchored the other end to a sturdy cottonwood. Together they pulled themselves to safety, Rebecca sobbing against Eliza's shoulder. "My PA says you're bad," the girl whimpered.
"Says you're teaching wrong things."
"Your PA loves you," Eliza replied, stroking wet hair from the child's face.
"That's never wrong."
They returned to find the outdoor classroom destroyed, books scattered, slates smashed, the medicine box emptied into mud. But the children were safe, and parents were arriving, drawn by word of the attack. Morrison himself pushed through the crowd, face dark with fury. "Where's my daughter?"
"Here,
Pa!" Rebecca ran to him. "Miss Quinn saved me. I fell in the water and she came for me." The man's expression underwent several transformations as he processed this. He looked at Eliza, soaked and muddy, still trying to salvage what teaching materials she could. Thank you," he managed stiffly.
"She's my student,"
Eliza said simply. "All of them are." That night, in the repaired schoolhouse, she sat with Yazzie tending various scrapes and bruises by lamplight. He'd brought his grandmother's salves, working with gentle efficiency. "Your hands are shaking again," he observed. Not from fear. She flexed her fingers, remembering the grip on the rope, on the child. From anger, they destroyed everything. Not everything. He gestured to the corner where salvaged items dried. "And materials can be replaced. What you did today cannot." Morrison still won't support the school. "No, but he won't oppose it as loudly. In the desert, sometimes neutrality is victory." She winced as he tended a cut on her palm from the rope. "I can't keep putting them at risk. These children would be at risk regardless. Pike wants their family's land, their water, their future. Education is just the excuse." He wrapped her hand carefully. "You give them weapons Pike can't burn. Knowledge. More than that, You show them they matter, that someone will wade into floodwater for them. The intimacy of the moment struck her alone together, his hands on hers, the lamp casting golden shadows. In Missouri. Thomas would have seen such a scene as provocation for violence. But Yazzie simply finished his work and moved to clean up, respecting the boundaries neither had spoken aloud. "Your shoulder," she said, noticing how he favored his left side. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." "It's not. Sit." He hesitated, then complied. She had to help him remove his shirt, revealing deep bruising where Pike's men had struck him during the distraction. Working carefully, she applied the salve, trying not to notice the other scars marking his skin, some old, some newer, all speaking of a life spent defending what mattered. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving us time to escape. Pike enjoys fear. I denied him that satisfaction." She felt the tension in his muscles, the control it took to accept help. "Does it ever get easier standing against them?" "No, but standing aside gets harder." He pulled his shirt back on. "Movements, careful. My grandfather said courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear for something greater than yourself." "What's greater for you?" He turned to look at her directly. "Used to be just my people, my clan. Now—" He gestured to encompass the schoolhouse, the salvaged books, her bandaged hands. "Now it's more complicated." Before she could respond, hoofbeats approached. They both tensed. But it was Senora Garcia with several other women, arms full of supplies. "For the school," she announced, bustling in. "Books from our homes, paper from the church, and this." She produced a wrapped bundle. "Senor Morrison sent it. Said his daughter insisted." Inside was a new slate and chalk, expensive items for a mining family. A small victory, as Yazzie had predicted. The women stayed to help reorganize, chattering in a mix of Spanish and English. They'd faced worse, their resilience born of generations of survival in harsh lands. Eliza felt herself adopted into their circle, no longer the outsider but part of the community's fabric. Later, as people departed, Yazzie lingered. Reeves was watching during the raid, making notes. "Let him. I've done nothing wrong. In his world, saving the wrong children is wrong enough." He paused at the door. "Be careful. Eliza, men like Reeves don't need truth when they have power." The use of her first name sent warmth through her chest. Could you teach the older boys horsemanship, give them skills beyond books? If you teach the girls herbs and healing, give them skills beyond kitchens." "Deal." They shook hands, formally, but the touch lingered a moment longer than business required. Then he was gone, swallowed by darkness, leaving her to wonder when protecting had become something more. That night, writing by candlelight, she documented everything: the false land claim, the attack, the destruction of property. If Reeves wanted to build a case, she'd build one too. But her last entry was personal. "Pulled us from the flood. His hands are scarred but gentle. I'm learning that strength can coexist with kindness, that protection doesn't require possession. Perhaps I'm finally healing from Thomas's poison. Perhaps we both are healing, in our different ways." She sealed the journal in her hidden cache, along with growing evidence of the railroad's crimes. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert, promising more storms. But for tonight, the children were safe. The school would continue, and two damaged people had found a moment's peace in shared purpose. In the Mexican Quarter, Yazzie worked silver by firelight, shaping a small thunderbird. His shoulder ached, but his hands were steady. Each tap of the hammer was a promise to protect, to endure, to hope for something beyond mere survival. The metal sang under his tools, taking shape like the future itself, uncertain but full of possibility. The storm passed, leaving the desert washed clean. Stars emerged sharp as silver pins against black cloth, and in the space between two worlds, two cultures, two wounded hearts, Something new began to grow tentative as spring grass, but just as determined to live. The day had been long, rebuilding what Pike's men had destroyed. Parents, children, and volunteers from across San Miguel had come together, transforming wreckage into something stronger. As purple shadows stretched across the mesa and the last helpers departed, Eliza found herself alone with Yazzie, organizing salvaged books by lamplight. Exhaustion weighed on her shoulders like a physical burden. She stumbled slightly, reaching for a high shelf, and suddenly he was there, steadying her with hands that smelled of sawdust and sage. "You need rest," he said quietly.
I need these children to have what was taken.
But even as she spoke, her body betrayed her, trembling with the accumulated strain of weeks of threats and days of labor.
Eliza.
Her name on his lips was soft as evening wind. "You can't pour from an empty vessel." She turned to face him, finding herself caught between his solid warmth and the desk behind her. In the lamplight, his dark eyes held depths she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before: concern, admiration, and something more that made her breath catch.
I'm afraid if I stop, I'll fall apart,
she admitted, the words barely a whisper.
Then lean on me.
He touched her face gently, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You don't have to carry everything alone. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. She leaned her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through worn cotton. His arms came around her carefully, as if she might shatter or flee. "Stay," he murmured into her hair. "You're my breath." The words were simple, but she heard layers beneath: not possession, but recognition. Not demand, but invitation. In the circle of his arms, she felt something she'd thought Thomas had killed forever: the possibility of trust without fear. She lifted her face to his, their lips meeting in a kiss that was question and answer both. Gentle, patient, with all the time in the world to explore this new territory between them. His hands remained still on her back, letting her set the pace, letting her choose. When they finally drew apart, both breathing unsteadily, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes.
I don't know how to do this,
she confessed. With Thomas, it was I never chose. Then we go slow, like tracking deer: patience and respect for what we pursue. He stepped back slightly, giving her space while keeping one hand linked with hers. What do you choose now? She looked at their joined hands, her pale fingers intertwined with his sun-darkened ones. In the morning, such a sight would scandalize the town. But here, now, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I choose to stop being afraid, she said firmly. And I choose to stand with you publicly against Pike and Doolin and anyone who threatens these children's futures.
That's dangerous.
Everything worth doing is. He smiled then, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Desert teachers, stubborn as sandstone.
Desert warriors,
she countered, patient as erosion. They spent the next hour planning, side by side at the lamplit desk. Judge Hale's circuit would bring him through San Miguel in 3 days, if they could present evidence of the water rights violations, the illegal seizures, the destruction of property.
We'll need witnesses,
Yazzie pointed out.
People willing to speak against Pike.
After today, we might have them. Morrison's gratitude won't last, but others saw what happened. Senora Garcia has been keeping her own records, and old McKendry has papers going back to Mexican rule. My grandmother has older claims. From when the Spanish first came, her people already knew every spring and seep. He paused, considering. She might speak to the judge, if approached correctly.
Would she speak to me?
After what you did for Rebecca Morrison? Yes. His hand covered hers on the desk. She says actions reveal character better than blood. They worked through the evening, compiling documents, organizing testimonies, when Yazzie mentioned the railroad's plans to dam Bitterwash entirely, redirecting all water to their depot. Eliza's anger burned fresh. That would destroy everything downstream, every small farm, every grazing area. Which is what they want. Desperate people sell cheap. His jaw tightened. My sister's family depends on that water. Without it, they'll have to move to the agency lands. Over my dead body. The vehemence in her voice made him look at her sharply. Don't say such things lightly. Pike is killed for less than water rights. I'm not speaking lightly. She met his gaze steadily. I've run before. From Ireland. From Thomas. From every fight that mattered. I won't run again. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we stand together. As if by mutual agreement, they began closing the school for the night, working in companionable silence. They moved around each other with surprising ease, he securing shutters while she banked the stove, she organizing tomorrow's lessons while he checked the door locks Pike's men had tried to break. Where will you sleep tonight? He asked as they prepared to leave. Your room at the boarding house isn't secure. She'd been trying not to think about that. Mrs. Pritchard's establishment was respectable, but flimsy, and Pike knew exactly which room was hers. I'll manage. The Garcia family has space, or... He hesitated, unusual for him. My camp is hidden, defensible. You'd be safe. The invitation hung between them, loaded with possibility and propriety's destruction. A white woman spending the night at a Navajo man's camp would be scandal enough to destroy her reputation forever. I'll stay with the Garcias, she decided, though part of her yearned for the other choice. But thank you. He accepted this with a nod, though she caught a flash of something disappointment relief in his eyes. They left together, walking through streets silvered by starlight. At the Garcia house, warm light spilled from windows and the sound of family chatter drifted out. Safety, community, belonging. Tomorrow we start gathering witnesses, Eliza said. Judge Hale needs to hear the truth. He'll hear it. Whether he listens is another matter. Yazzie paused, then pulled something from his pocket. This is yours. It was a small silver thunderbird, intricate and beautiful, on a leather cord. Protection, he explained, and a promise that storms bring renewal after destruction. It's beautiful. She let him fasten it around her neck, shivering as his fingers brushed her nape. But I have nothing to give in return. You gave my people's children a future. You gave my nephew pride in his intelligence. You gave me... He stopped, searching for words. You gave me reason to believe in bridges between worlds. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. This bridge we're building, it goes both ways. He caught her hand, pressing it briefly to his lips. Until tomorrow, teacher. Until tomorrow, warrior. She watched him disappear into darkness, then knocked at the Garcia door. Senora Garcia welcomed her with knowing eyes but no questions, settling her in a small, clean room with thick adobe walls. Lying in the narrow bed, Eliza touched the silver thunderbird at her throat. Through the window, she could see the first stars emerging. Somewhere out there, Yazzie kept watch. Somewhere, Pike and Reeves plotted their next move, and somewhere between fear and hope, two wounded people had found something worth fighting for together. Tomorrow would bring new battles. But tonight, she fell asleep with the memory of gentle hands and patient lips, with the promise that she no longer stood alone against the storm. The thunderbird caught moonlight, casting tiny reflections on the wall, silver possibilities dancing in the darkness, fragile and fierce as love itself. In his hidden camp, Yazzie sat by a small fire, working on another piece of silver. This one would be for her a water serpent, symbol of life flowing despite all obstacles. His hands moved surely despite the distraction of her lingering scent, the memory of her trust as she leaned into his strength. He'd known warriors and healers, traders and teachers, but never someone who combined them all fierce and gentle, frightened and brave, broken and whole. She challenged everything he thought he knew about boundaries and belonging.
"Stay. You're my breath,"
He'd told her. The words had risen from somewhere deeper than thought, true as bedrock. Now he had to prove worthy of them, and of her. The silver sang under his tools, taking shape like hope itself. Tomorrow they would face judges and enemies, laws written to exclude and powers bent on destruction. But tonight, under stars that blessed both desert and stranger alike, two hearts had chosen to beat in harmony. It was enough. It was everything. It was a beginning. The warehouse had been cleared of grain sacks and mining equipment, transformed into a makeshift courtroom. Judge Horace Hale, a thin man with sharp eyes behind wire spectacles, sat behind a table that served as his bench. The air hung thick with tension and the smell of too many bodies pressed into too small a space. Eliza sat in the front row, her evidence organized in careful folders. Beside her, Yazzie remained steady as stone, though she could feel the coiled readiness in him. Behind them, the community had gathered Mexican farmers, Navajo families, even some white settlers who'd grown tired of Pike's strong-arm tactics. "This court is now in session," Judge Hale announced, his voice carrying surprising authority. "We're here to examine complaints regarding water rights along Bitterwash Creek. Mr. Pike, you represent the railroad's interests." Pike stood, dressed in his best suit but still looking like a wolf in sheep's clothing. "I do, Your Honor, and I'd like to start by saying these complaints are nothing but troublemaking by certain agitators." His eyes fixed on Eliza with naked hostility. "Miss Quinn," the judge continued, "you've brought evidence." "I have, Your Honor." She stood, grateful her voice remained steady. "Documentation of traditional water usage, illegal seizure of property, and destruction of public resources." "Objection!" Pike slammed his fist on his table. "This woman has no standing here. She's a known troublemaker with a violent past."
"Mr. Pike."
Judge Hale's voice cracked like a whip. "I'll determine who has standing in my court. Continue. Miss Quinn." Eliza presented her evidence methodically. First, the dead fish from the creek, preserved in glass jars. These died 3 days after the railroad delivered a shipment of industrial lime. Tests show lime contamination in the water. "Could have been natural causes," Pike protested. "Then explain this." She produced a sample of the lime itself, matched to the railroad's shipping manifest. Same chemical composition. The railroad poisoned Bitterwash to drive out residents. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Judge Hale leaned forward, examining the evidence with interest. Old McKendry testified next, his voice strong despite his 70 years. "My family's watered at Bitterwash since 1842. Got papers from the Mexican government, recognized by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Railroad can't just take what's been ours by right." Pike's lawyer, Reeves, who'd traded his Pinkerton badge for legal pretensions, stood smoothly. "Those Mexican grants were never properly surveyed. The railroad's claims are based on accurate American measurements. Measurements taken after moving survey markers." Yazzie interjected, producing the original Spanish markers he'd recovered. These were pulled up and replanted 50 yards west, expanding railroad territory illegally. The judge examined the markers carefully. "These do appear to be authentic, Mr. Pike." But Pike had lost patience with legal niceties. He signaled his men stationed near the door. "Your Honor, I think we need to clear this courtroom of hostile elements." The explosion came without warning. The ground shook as the railroad's dynamite storage, a quarter-mile away, erupted in a ball of fire and smoke. The blast shattered windows and sent people diving for cover. In the chaos, Pike lunged for the evidence table, trying to destroy the documents. Yazzie moved faster, intercepting him with an efficiency born of years reading violent intent. They grappled briefly before Pike drew a concealed knife, slashing wildly. Eliza grabbed a chair, bringing it down on Pike's arm, forcing him to drop the weapon. "Fire!" someone screamed. "The explosion, the lumber yards burning." Indeed, flames were visible through the broken windows, spreading from the dynamite storage toward the town's wooden buildings. The forest edge had caught too, dry pine needles becoming instant tinder. "Everyone out," Judge Hale commanded, maintaining remarkable composure. "This hearing is recessed, not dismissed. We'll reconvene when—" But Reeves had produced a gun, pointing it at Eliza. "Nobody's reconvening anything. Miss Quinn is coming with me. Missouri wants a word about her husband's death." "Like hell," Yazzie growled, stepping between them. "Move aside! Breed!" Reeves snarled. "This doesn't concern you." "Everything about her concerns me." The standoff lasted heartbeats before young Samuel Yazzie burst in. "The school! The fire's heading for the school!" Eliza forgot about Reeves. Forgot about everything except the children's books and supplies they'd worked so hard to replace. She ran into the smoke-filled street, Yazzie beside her, racing toward the schoolhouse. The fire had indeed jumped from the lumber yard to the buildings nearby. A line of townspeople had formed a bucket brigade, but the flames were winning. Worse, she could see small figures trapped in the schoolyard children who'd been playing, now cut off by smoke and flame. Without hesitation, she plunged into the smoke, finding Maria Gonzalez and 3 other children huddled against the well. "Follow me," she shouted, leading them through the safest path she could find. Yazzie had circled around, creating a firebreak with other men, using shovels and blankets to beat back flames. His team of young Navajo riders worked with practiced efficiency, saving the water tower that supplied the Mexican quarter. Through the chaos, Eliza saw something that chilled her more than any fire. Reeves dragging away young Rebecca Morrison, apparently planning to use the child as leverage against her father's cooperation. "No," she intercepted him near the burning lumber, tackling him with fury born of protective rage. They rolled dangerously close to falling timbers, her Irish temper finally unleashed. "You'll not use children for your schemes." Reeves tried to maintain his grip on both Rebecca and his gun, succeeding at neither. The weapon spun away as Rebecca bit his hand and fled. He backhanded Eliza, sending her sprawling, then scrambled for his gun. A silver flash in the firelight warned her Yazzie's mirror, the one he'd gifted her weeks ago, reflecting the flames. She rolled aside as Reeves fired, the bullet sparking off stones where she'd been. Then Yazzie was there, disarming Reeves with brutal efficiency. "Federal agent," Reeves gasped. "You're assaulting a federal agent." "I'm preventing kidnapping," Yazzie replied calmly, though Eliza saw the fury in his eyes. "Many witnesses saw you take the child." Indeed, half the town had seen the attempted abduction. Even Morrison, who'd arrived to find his daughter safe in Eliza's arms, looked shaken. The fire was finally controlled as evening fell, leaving a scar of blackened earth and ruined buildings. Miraculously, no lives were lost, though several were injured. The schoolhouse survived, saved by the firebreak. Judge Hale reconvened court in the open air, by necessity and perhaps preference. Pike was in custody, his plan to destroy evidence having backfired spectacularly. Reeves sat sullenly under guard, his credentials in serious question. "I've seen enough," the judge declared. "The evidence clearly shows illegal manipulation of water rights, destruction of property, and attempted murder. Mr. Pike, you'll be held for territorial trial. Mr. Reeves, your behavior today will be reported to your superiors. As for the water rights," he pulled out a map, marking it carefully. "Bitterwash Creek reverts to traditional usage patterns. The railroad must find another water source or negotiate fairly with existing users. Any attempt to dam or divert without proper authority will result in federal intervention." The crowd erupted in celebration, but Eliza barely heard them. She was exhausted, singed, and overwhelmed. Strong hands guided her to a quiet spot. Yazzie, of course, checking her for injuries with gentle efficiency. "You're burned," he said, examining her arms where embers had marked her. "So are you." His shirt was charred in places, his hands blistered from fighting fire. They tended each other's wounds in companionable silence, the adrenaline fading into something deeper. Around them, the community worked together, clearing debris, sharing food and water, boundaries temporarily forgotten in shared survival.
Reeves will be back,
Eliza said quietly.
Let him come. The whole town saw him try to take a child. Even Missouri can't ignore that.
She leaned against his shoulder, too tired to care who saw. We won. Today, tomorrow brings new battles. He pressed something into her hand, documents slightly singed but intact. McKendry saved these from the fire. Copies of everything, including a statement from the surveyor who was paid to move markers. Evidence Pike thought he destroyed. Desert teachers, Yazzie murmured, stubborn as ever. Sheriff Doolin had disappeared during the chaos, his badge found abandoned in the street. Word spread that he'd been seen riding hard for Mexico. Pike's payments apparently not worth facing federal investigation. As stars emerged above the smoke, Eliza found herself surrounded by people she'd fought for, children showing her treasures saved from fire, parents offering food and shelter. Even Morrison gruffly thanking her for protecting Rebecca twice in 1 week.
You've given us more than education,
Senora Garcia said, embracing her carefully. You've shown us how to stand together. Later, as the town settled into exhausted sleep, Yazzie walked her to temporary quarters in the church, the safest building still standing. At the door, he paused, touching her face with infinite gentleness. Your breath saved this town today, he said. Your courage, your refusal to yield. We saved it together. She covered his hand with hers.
All of us.
But you lit the spark. He kissed her forehead, a blessing more intimate than passion. Rest now, warrior woman. Tomorrow we rebuild. She watched him disappear into darkness, then climbed to her makeshift bed in the church loft. Through the window, she could see the stars eternal, unchanging, promising that fires pass but truth endures. The silver thunderbird at her throat caught moonlight as she finally slept. Exhausted, but victorious. They'd won more than water rights today. They'd won the right to exist, to learn, to love across boundaries others would burn the world to maintain. And that, Eliza thought as dreams claimed her, was worth every scar. The dust had settled on Pike's arrest and Doolin's flight, but the real work of rebuilding had just begun. Judge Hale's ruling stood firm. Pike would face trial in Prescott for attempted murder and destruction of property, while the railroad was forced to renegotiate all water contracts under federal supervision. Most surprising was the letter that arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by special courier to the reconstructed schoolhouse. Eliza read it 3 times before the words truly sank in. What is it? Yazzie asked, looking up from the horseshoeing demonstration he was giving the older boys.
It's from Reeves, the Pinkerton.
She held the paper like it might bite.
He's apologizing.
The gathered students fell silent. Everyone remembered the detective who'd tried to kidnap Rebecca Morrison during the fire. He says his own son was trapped in a burning building in Chicago last year, saved by an Irish immigrant who died in the effort. Her voice caught. He says, seeing me save Rebecca, and then his attempt to use her, he says he's resigning from the Pinkertons. And he sent a letter to Missouri officially closing their investigation into Thomas's death. Senora Garcia, who'd been teaching the girls herbal preparation, crossed herself. God works in mysterious ways. Read the last part, Yazzie prompted gently, having noticed her eyes lingering there. I was wrong about many things, Miss Quinn, but mostly I was wrong about what makes a person criminal. I have spent years hunting those who break laws, never questioning whether those laws were just, you broke no law saving that child, yet I would have destroyed you for it. I pray you can forgive a fool who learned wisdom too late. My son lives because someone like you thought his life mattered more than their own. I will not forget again. The schoolhouse was quiet for a long moment. Then young Samuel raised his hand. Does this mean you're safe now, Miss Quinn? Really safe?
I believe so,
Samuel. She folded the letter carefully. Sometimes people can change, given the right push. Like Mr. Morrison, Maria added. The gruff miner had indeed changed, becoming one of the school's most unlikely supporters after Eliza saved his daughter twice. The school had more than recovered, it had grown, with railroad money now flowing through legal channels and federal oversight ensuring fair distribution. They'd built a proper building with real windows and a wood floor. Books arrived weekly from sympathizers back east who'd read about their struggle in newspaper accounts Eliza had written. More importantly, the community had embraced the school as truly theirs. Parents took turns teaching their skills weaving, farming, metalwork, traditional stories. The artificial barriers between groups hadn't disappeared, but they'd become more permeable. Speaking of changes, Yazzie said, his tone carefully neutral. My grandmother wishes to meet with you, Eliza, formally. The students exchanged knowing glances, in Navajo tradition. Such formal meetings between an elder and a woman involved with a family member meant one thing: discussion of marriage. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. I would be honored. That evening, she prepared carefully. Wearing her best dress and the silver thunderbird Yazzie had given her, Senora Garcia helped with her hair, chattering excitedly about wedding traditions and cross-cultural ceremonies. You'll need witnesses from both sides, she explained. Someone to speak for you in the white way, someone to speak for him in the Navajo way. We haven't. He hasn't formally asked. Bah, the whole town sees how you look at each other, like the desert seeing its first rain. The older woman patted her cheek. You deserve happiness. Mija, both of you. Yazzie's grandmother lived in a traditional hogan near the canyon mouth, close enough to town for trade, but far enough to maintain the old ways. Eliza had seen her at the trial, a dignified woman whose testimony about ancient water rights had helped sway Judge Hale. The meeting was formal but warm. They sat on woven blankets while Yazzie's sister served traditional tea. His grandmother studied Eliza with eyes that missed nothing. You saved the Morrison child, she said finally, speaking through Yazzie as translator, though Eliza suspected she understood more English than she let on. Twice. She was my student, my responsibility. The elder woman nodded. And you teach our children alongside white children. This causes you trouble. Less now than before. But still some. Yes, Eliza admitted. There are always those who fear change. Change. The grandmother smiled slightly. Like a white woman wanting to marry into the dean. Eliza's breath caught, but she met the elder's gaze steadily. If such a woman existed, she would need to understand that she was joining not just one person, but a family, a clan, a way of life. And if such a man existed, the grandmother continued, eyes twinkling now, he would need to understand that he was joining with a woman who has her own strength, her own medicine, her own connection to the holy people through her actions. They spoke for over an hour about traditions, expectations, the challenges of living between worlds. Yazzie translated faithfully, though Eliza caught him adding his own comments occasionally, making both women smile. Finally, the grandmother stood, indicating the formal meeting was over. She took Eliza's hands in her weathered ones and spoke directly in accented English. You have good hands, healing hands, teaching hands. These are the same thing. Yes. Yes, Eliza agreed softly. Then you will be good for my grandson, and he for you. She patted Eliza's cheek much as Senora Garcia had. The wedding will be in spring. Both ways your church, our ceremony. This is acceptable. Eliza glanced at Yazzie, who was trying to maintain his composure despite the joy in his eyes. More than acceptable. The ride back to town was quiet, both processing what had just happened. Finally, Yazzie spoke. I should have asked you first, before bringing you to grandmother. Did you really think I'd say no? He reined in his horse, turning to face her in the moonlight. I think you're the strongest woman I know. But strength doesn't always mean wanting to bind yourself to someone who brings complications.
Hasty and Yazzie, she said firmly. I've been bound to you since the day you let us out of that sandstorm. The only question was whether we'd acknowledge it.
He dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist. The town will talk.
They already talk. Some will never accept it.
Then they'll miss out on some beautiful children who'll speak 3 languages and know both how to shoe a horse and conjugate Latin verbs. He laughed, a rich, full sound she'd rarely heard from him. Children.
Eventually. She stepped closer, hands resting on his chest.
If you're willing, I'm willing for anything with you.
He cradled her face gently. My desert teacher, my stubborn, brave, impossible woman.
My warrior, my protector, my partner.
They kissed under the vast sweep of stars, sealing promises that would be formalized come spring but were already written in their hearts.
The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Mrs. Pritchard, from the boarding house, a woman who'd barely acknowledged Eliza existed despite months of renting to her.
I heard about your plans, the woman said stiffly. With the Yazzie man? Eliza braced for condemnation, but Mrs. Pritchard surprised her. My daughter ran off with a traveling salesman 5 years ago. Haven't heard from her since, but you stayed, fought for this town, for children not even your own. She pulled out a small wrapped package. This was my mother's, from the old country, Ireland, like you.
Inside was a delicate lace veil, yellowed with age, but beautiful.
For your wedding,
Mrs. Pritchard said gruffly. Both of them, if it works for however you people do things.
Thank you, Eliza managed through sudden tears. This means more than you know.
Well, the older woman shifted uncomfortably. Just remember us when you're teaching those mixed babies of yours. This town could use more fighters, whatever color they come in. As spring approached, the school flourished. The new building included a small clinic where Eliza taught basic medicine alongside letters. Yazzie's horse training program had expanded, giving young men alternatives to railroad labor or mining. The wedding planning became a community effort. The church ceremony would be simple, officiated by the circuit preacher who'd initially opposed the integrated school but had come around after witnessing its success. The Navajo ceremony would follow tradition, with both families participating despite the unusual circumstances. 2 weddings, twice the food, Senora Garcia declared happily, organizing the Mexican community's contributions. Even Morrison had offered to help, gruffly suggesting he could manage chairs and tables if needed. But it was a quiet evening a week before the ceremonies that stuck in Eliza's memory. She and Yazzie sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching sunset paint the mesas gold and crimson. No regrets, he asked.
Only one.
She leaned against his shoulder.
That Thomas stole so many years I could have spent being happy.
Those years led you here.
True.
She turned to look at him.
And here is exactly where I want to be.
He pulled something from his pocket, a new piece of silver jewelry. This time it was a hair comb decorated with water serpents and thunderbirds intertwined. For the weddings, both of them.
It's beautiful.
She let him place it in her hair, feeling the weight of it like a crown. Like everything you create, we create together, he corrected. The school, the community, the future, together. As stars emerged above them, children's voices drifted from the town, English and Spanish and Navajo mingling like streams joining a river. The sound of the future, Eliza thought, complex and challenging but flowing forward nonetheless. Together, she agreed, and sealed it with a kiss that promised all their tomorrows. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and coming rain, blessing what laws and prejudice would have forbidden. But here, in this small corner of a changing world, love had carved its own channel patient as water, strong as stone, inevitable as dawn after the longest night. 1 year later, the spring rains had been generous. Corn grew tall in fields that had nearly been abandoned, and the desert bloomed with unexpected color. The schoolhouse, now a proper building with glass windows and wooden floors, stood proud at the town's heart, its doors open to all who wished to learn. Eliza stood at the chalkboard. 7 months along with child, but still teaching, writing out the day's lesson in careful script. Her students, 32 now, from toddlers to teenagers, copied diligently. The mix of languages in the room had become music to her ears: English for formal lessons, Spanish for storytelling, Navajo for the songs that opened each day. "Marta," she called to a girl in the front row, "please read your composition." The child stood proudly. The same girl who'd once struggled to write her own name. Now she read fluently, "My name is Marta Gonzalez. I am 10 years old. I want to be a teacher like Mrs. Yazzie, who shows us that all people can learn together." Eliza smiled at the formal title, Mrs. Yazzie. The twin ceremonies last spring had been the event of the season, bringing together communities that rarely mixed socially. The church wedding had been simple but moving, with Judge Hale himself returning to witness the union he'd inadvertently helped create. The traditional Navajo ceremony had lasted 4 days, with blessings and rituals that bound her not just to Hastian, but to his entire clan. Through the window, she could see her husband working with the young men at the horse training grounds he'd established. The railroad, under new management after Pike's conviction, had contracted with him to provide fresh mounts for their expanded mail routes. It brought steady income and, more importantly, dignity to young Navajo men who might otherwise have faced limited options. "Mrs. Yazzie," Samuel raised his hand, "will you still teach after the baby comes?" "Of course," she assured him, "though I'll have help." She nodded toward Maria, now 14, and her assistant. Change doesn't mean ending what works, only adding to it. After dismissal, she walked slowly toward their home, a modest adobe structure on the hill overlooking both the town and the canyon. Hastian had built it with help from both communities, incorporating elements from both cultures. Glass windows faced east for morning prayers, while a traditional summer kitchen allowed for cooking during hot months. She paused at the new water marker, where the spring had been properly documented in both English and Navajo. The brass plaque read, "Bitter Wash Spring, established usage, prior to 1542, protected under federal treaty. All persons welcome to draw water, regardless of origin." Admiring your handiwork, Hastian appeared beside her, finished with his teaching for the day. "Our handiwork," she corrected, leaning into his embrace. "How did the training go?" "Well, young Joseph Begay has real talent. The stage line wants to hire him full-time." He rested his hand on her swollen belly. "How's our little warrior today?" "Active. I think she's practicing her letters already, the way she moves." "She, or he, either way, they'll be loved." They walked home together, stopping frequently as townspeople greeted them. The suspicious looks had faded over the months, replaced by acceptance and even pride. San Miguel had become known as that town where everyone learns together, attracting families seeking a fresh start. At their door, a familiar figure waited old McKendry, hat in hand. "Evening, folks," he said gruffly. "Got something to discuss." They invited him in, Eliza serving tea while the old rancher gathered his thoughts. "I'm not getting younger," he finally said. "No children of my own. As you know, been thinking about what happens to my land when I'm gone." He pulled out a rolled document. "Had a lawyer in Prescott draw this up proper. I'm leaving the river portion of my ranch to the school, Perpetual Trust, for education of all children in the county." Eliza nearly dropped her teacup. "Mr. McKendry, that's incredibly generous." "It's sense," he corrected gruffly. "You two showed me something I'd forgotten, that different don't mean wrong. Those children you're teaching, they're the future, mixed or not. They'll need water and wisdom both." He stood abruptly. clearly uncomfortable with sentiment. Anyway, it's done. Thought you should know. After he left, Eliza and Hastien sat in stunned silence. The McKendry Ranch's water access would secure the school's future indefinitely. He's right, you know, Hastien said finally. About the future. It won't be easy for children who don't fit in just one world. Was it easy for us? Eliza countered. But we're here, happy, together. Together, he agreed, kissing her forehead. That night, they attended a community gathering at the renovated town hall. The occasion was the dedication of a new well, funded jointly by the Mexican Mutual Aid Society, the Navajo Chapter House, and the Miners Benevolent Association. 3 groups that had barely spoken a year ago now worked as one. Sheriff Grant, Doolin's replacement, was a young man from Santa Fe who'd taken the job seriously. Never thought I'd see the day. He admitted to Eliza, "Town this peaceful, everyone working together. You started something special here." "We all did," she corrected. "I just refused to let them burn it down." As if summoned by the mention of fire, a stranger approached a well-dressed woman with Eastern manners and a notebook. "Mrs. Yazzie, I'm Catherine Bellwether from Harper's Monthly. I'm writing a piece about educational innovations in the territories. Your school has quite a reputation." "Good or bad?" Hastien asked dryly. "Extraordinary," the journalist said. "A fully integrated school with trilingual education, community involvement, and practical training alongside academics. You're decades ahead of most cities." They spoke for an hour. Eliza careful to credit the community effort rather than claiming personal glory. The journalist took notes rapidly, especially when children demonstrated their skills in multiple languages. "There are those who say mixing cultures weakens them," Miss Bellwether observed. "Does the river weaken when tributaries join it?" Eliza responded. "Or does it grow stronger, deeper, more capable of carving its path?" As the evening progressed, music began fiddles and guitars, drums and flutes, creating a sound unique to San Miguel. Couples danced, children played, and for a moment the weight of history seemed light. "Dance with me," Hastien murmured in her ear. "I'm the size of a barn," she protested. "You're carrying our future. Dance with me." They moved slowly together, her head on his shoulder, his hands protective around her. Other couples joined Mexican, Anglo, Navajo, and various mixtures thereof. The sight would have been impossible just 2 years ago. "I've been thinking," Eliza said softly, "about names. If it's a boy, I'd like to call him Thomas." Hastien pulled back to look at her. "Surprised? After your first husband?" "After a man who taught me what I didn't want," she said firmly, "and whose death, however it happened, led me here. Without that pain, I'd never have found this joy. It seems right to transform that name into something positive." "And if it's a girl?" "Sarah, after your grandmother. She gave us her blessing when many wouldn't have." "She saw your heart," Hastien said simply, "as I do." The next weeks passed peacefully. The school gained 3 new students, children of railroad workers who'd heard about the quality of education. Eliza trained Maria and 2 other young women to assist with teaching, preparing for her confinement. Then, on a morning when thunderclouds gathered promisingly over the mesas, her time came. The birth was attended by Senora Garcia and Hastien's sister, blending traditions as the community had learned to do. Hastien paced outside, following custom, while inside the women worked with centuries of combined wisdom. "It's a girl," Senora Garcia announced at last, "healthy and loud." Sarah Yazzie entered the world as thunder rolled across the desert, bringing the blessed rain. Her first cry mingled with the sound of water beginning to flow in the wash's life answering life. Hastien was allowed in once mother and child were settled. His face, as he held his daughter for the first time, was something Eliza would treasure forever, wonder and fierce protectiveness combined. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Look, she has your eyes." "And your hair." Eliza touched the thick black fuzz covering the baby's head. She'll be beautiful. She'll be strong, he corrected. Like her mother. Word spread quickly. By evening, gifts had piled up outside their door blankets and clothing. Toys and charms, practical items and beautiful ones. The community celebrating new life as communities always have. 3 days later, following tradition, Eliza brought Sarah to the school for the first time. The children gathered around in wonder, gentle hands reaching to touch the baby who represented their shared future. She'll learn here too, young Marta declared solemnly. We'll teach her everything English and Spanish and Navajo and numbers and stories and how to be kind. That's all anyone needs to learn, Eliza agreed, tears in her eyes, as she stood in the schoolhouse she'd fought to create, holding the daughter who would inherit this integrated world, surrounded by children who no longer saw difference as division. Eliza felt the circle complete, not ended, never ended, but whole and continuing. Outside, rain blessed the earth, filling the washes and springs. Water found its way as it always had, patient and persistent, joining streams that seemed separate into rivers that carved the future, and in a small adobe school in San Miguel, Arizona territory. The future had a face and a name and a chance to grow strong. Hastian appeared in the doorway, his smile soft. The newspaper woman's article was published. She called us a beacon of hope in the desert. Orders for our curriculum guide are coming from as far as California. Then we'd better write one, Eliza said practically. Maria, you'll help. Samuel, you too. If people want to know how we did this, we'll tell them one child at a time, one day at a time, one barrier dissolved by patience and proof that we're more alike than different. As if in agreement, baby Sarah cooed, a sound that needed no translation. The universal language of new beginning, of possibility, of hope that flows stronger than any force that would divide. The rainbow after the storm stretched from canyon to mesa, bridging worlds with color and light, and in the schoolhouse below, they continued the work teaching, learning, growing, becoming, together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're experiencing this tale. Please share in the comments below where you're listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts about Eliza and Yazzy's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Tales. Give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means everything and helps these tales of the Old West reach fellow story lovers around the world.